All right, recording started. This is the meeting of the Kubernetes Storage SIG. Today is December 14, 2017. As a reminder, this meeting is recorded and published on YouTube. On the agenda today, we're going to go over the end of quarter review for the items that we've been working on this quarter. I was planning on kicking off the planning for next quarter in this session, but I think we should delay that until the beginning of January. So let's start with the planning spreadsheet and go over what we worked on and get an end of quarter status update. All right, so let's see if we could expand out this column. So block volume support, Aaron, I believe this went in.
Correct.
Cool. So that's done. Implement scheduler and binding logic for local persistent storage, Michelle.
Done.
Done. Enable containerization of mount dependencies, Jan.
Done. Missing end-to-end test.
Cool. Out of tree CSI volume implementation is done. The design for that is also done. Okay. Generic storage topology solution that work with CSI and local storage did not get started. So we're going to punt that to the next quarter. Volume resize, file system resize, and add more volume types a month. I believe this was completed.
I think it is done.
Cool. And we'll skip these as not started. Local storage, pre-provisioner security hardening.
Punted.
Punted. So we'll move that to the next quarter. Kubectl expose capacity isolation resource management information. Jing, are you on the line? Or Ren? Okay, we'll follow up with that and the subsequent item offline with Jing and Ren. Enabling kubectl to expose PVC capacity isolation. Chang, are you on the line?
Yeah, that's not being worked on right now.
Okay, so we'll carry it on to the next quarter then. End-to-end test for capacity isolation, either Ren or Jing. We were not here, so we'll have to, oh, that was done, looks like. All right. David, reviewing events and log.
Yeah, the PR has been sent out. It should be in by the end of the week.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that as done. And the same thing for logs, right?
Yep.
Cool. Persistent PVC deletion when pod is using it. Gopal?
Done.
Sweet. Oops, mark that as not started. Process missing volumes from actual state of the world. Amat, that was done. All right, enabling raw block for local storage, we punted on. Encryption, we punted on. Backups, punted. Investigate surfacing metrics. Wipab, do you have any update here? Okay, we'll have to follow up with that offline. And that was punted from this quarter, and that was punted from this quarter. Okay. So we got a fair amount done this quarter. We got, sorry, go ahead.
So for tracking purposes, right, can you add like a flex volume marking ZA done?
Ah, right. Okay.
Just for tracking so that people will know if they look at the Excel sheet.
Did that PR get merged?
I thought so.
Okay, and let's just make sure that, I think it lifted code freeze yesterday. Let's make sure it got into the release branch.
Give me one. Yeah, I see it says merged actually, 57075. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Let's just make sure it makes it into the release branch. Otherwise, we'll have to cherry pick it.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you. All right, cool. So a lot accomplished this quarter. You guys should be very proud of what this SIG has accomplished in this year and in this quarter. So moving on from that, that took less than 20 minutes. We have a lot left in the day. One thing I wanted to discuss was a suggestion by Michael Rubin. He attended KubeCon last week, and one of the topics that he ran into a lot was how do you onboard new people into the storage SIG? The folks who are already active participants in this SIG tend to know how to contribute, what to do, how to participate in planning, things like that. But for someone who's new to the SIG, it's a little bit overwhelming and not clear how things work. So they just tend to lurk or disappear. And we want to try to improve that process. So one suggestion he had was to have a one-off meeting for SIG storage where we would discuss some of these topics, things like how to contribute, what the SIG needs help with, how to add a volume plugin, where should it go, what does entry versus flex versus CSI versus external provisioner mean. Do folks think this is worthwhile? Any other ideas to help onboard people? Is this a problem that we don't have?
I think it's worthwhile, Saad. In terms of a follow-up idea for those who want to do it, maybe we could even add to this with some kind of buddy system where, you know, we could solicit volunteers who'd want to link up with these people and answer one-on-one questions they might have after going through that training track that is already listed there.
That's a good idea.
Well, and Paris from Google had a good idea when I talked to her at KubeCon about doing like a group mentoring, because sometimes pairing up is intimidating, and just to have like an open session, and that way it would allow us to cover more ground as a group. So
maybe the buddy system could be like a list of volunteers, you know, whatever subset of the group wants to take these questions from newcomers.
Yeah. Yeah, and we could, I think it would be good to do like a storage 101 kind of thing, and then, you know, have maybe a Slack channel available, like ask us anything, even stupid questions, because I think people get intimidated and they don't want to contribute because they don't want to ask sometimes. So it would just be like, you know, how do I do this? How do I get started?
Yeah, and on that list of suggested topics, it's almost like a training track. And if it sounds like, you know, it's maybe presentations, and some people prefer, I think, to watch YouTubes rather than read. So we could perhaps even record it. Yeah. I think I could volunteer to maybe get some resource for getting a recording made.
Okay. So you know what? Let's do this. For these topics that we have here, put your name next to it if you want to give a presentation on it. And then what I'll do is put together a meeting. It'll be a VC, so it's relatively low cost. We can record it, and people will just present presentations. Folks can tune in live, and then we'll post it to YouTube afterwards. And then we'll follow up with the mentorship idea.
Is this in addition to what the SIG contributors, or there is another SIG which is focused on this, right?
I'm not aware of what the contributor SIG is up to, honestly.
Yeah, maybe we can check with them and see that maybe if they have some procedure, right, we can just maybe we can get to follow that.
Okay.
We got some of the stuff already.
Yep, that's a good idea.
I suppose another thing to add to the coverage there, it might be a subset of what's there, but calling attention to where the docs live would be a good idea too. You know, that could be part of the process of adding a new storage plugin where your docs potentially could go in any number of places, but it's probably worth a slide or two to indicate what those places might be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we could probably bundle a couple of these questions into a single presentation. So I opened up slots here for presentations for the veterans in this group, or for folks who are familiar with this SIG, who want to help others. Throw your name in there and set up a presentation. For now, you could put down your name, and then later we could sort out who's going to present what. All right, cool. Any other ideas, suggestions, comments on this topic?
There was a pull request open in upstream about the documentation of volume plugins, like how they're written, how it is structured. I think that never got much. It might be a good idea to get that in somewhere.
Of how to write a volume plugin?
No, how the volume plugin interface looks like, what methods a volume plugin is supposed to implement, and things like that.
Okay.
So I'm new, and basically how to write volume plugin will be of much of interest for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe a CSI volume plugin? Is that what?
I think that'll go hand in hand with the conversation about like this topic right here, how to add a volume plugin.
Because the CSI volume plugin documentation is quite extensive.
Yeah. I think we should call out everything, what the difference between entry versus flex versus CSI is, and then we could do a high level on how to write a volume plugin for each of these, and then focus on the preferred methods that we currently recommend and deep dive into those.
This will be very useful for me. Like I'm learning, and I need to do this.
Sweet. Okay.
Maybe it's worthwhile to have a separate section on our Kubernetes.io website tailored for storage vendors versus consumers versus developers who are just developing on Kubernetes. I think that's the main focus of the documentation right now, not so much for those storage vendors.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a good idea. So for that, we can take an item for Q1 to do that. We'll have to talk to the docs team and see how it fits in with the rest of their vision. Any other suggestions, comments? Okay, so anybody who wants to volunteer to help out with this, throw your name on there. I'll send out an email to folks and we'll get something set up. I was thinking maybe second half of January, but we can sort out the dates, and then we'll send out the details to the Kubernetes Storage SIG mailing list, and of course we'll mention it on subsequent calls. Speaking of subsequent, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know. On the learning side of things, I would like to be guinea pig to learn from what we will be trying to do here on documentation, because again, the goal for me will be to provide vendor plugins or research how to do it. So I may volunteer as a guinea pig student.
That's perfect. All right, cool. So keep an eye out for details on when that's going to happen, and any feedback you have throughout the process, feel free to send to the SIG.
Hey, Saad,
Yes.
I can add it, but just real quick, as far as suggested topics, is a high level of understanding of the storage subsystem, including controllers, API. Those are what I can think of.
Yeah.
Especially the controllers.
Saad, you had a great diagram with like 100 boxes on it.
Yeah, we could probably pull out one of those presentations and use them. Yeah, that's a great idea. I think depending on how many topics we end up here, we might have to break this into a couple of sessions. Maybe start with Storage 101 and then Storage 102.
This will be very beneficial.
Cool. All right, so next topic on the agenda is when the next meeting should be. Officially, it's scheduled for December 28, which is dead middle of the holidays, and I imagine a lot of folks are going to be out. I would like to suggest skipping that meeting, giving folks time off, and then reconvening the first week of January, January 4th. And we could kick off planning during that week for Q1. In the meantime, we'll have the spreadsheet. We'll add in the 1.10 tab here so folks can start pre-populating it ahead of time. And then we can start assigning people and all of that in the first week of January. How does that sound?
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay, any objections? Okay, cool. So that is the plan of action then. Next up, Yasni. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? Yasin?
Yeah, that's Yasin, exactly.
Yasin. Okay.
So basically, I just want to discuss the Csi timeline because on the working group of cloud providers, we're starting to think about writing adapters for volume plugins. And we are really interested to know when CSI will go beta, since we'll, I think, write adapters for 3 cloud providers and maintain them as the API changes. So yeah, first thing that we're interested in is maybe the timeline that CSI will follow.
Sure. So for CSI, we hit alpha this quarter. Next steps are to itemize all the items that all the requirements that we have to hit beta. The folks working on this project, including Vlad, Luis, Brad, Jan, and I, and Chakri are going to be going through and creating that list. We have a planning session on Friday to do that. And then based on that, we're going to see how much of that we can bite off for Q1. If it is sufficient enough, then we're going to attempt to drive to beta in Q1. If the list ends up being too big, we're going to say we're going to maintain alpha for Q1, try to tackle as much of the list as possible in Q1, and then drive to beta in Q2. So you're looking at beta either Q1 or Q2. And then subsequently 1 or possibly 2 quarters to GA. So you're looking at anywhere from end of Q2 to GA to end of the next year to GA. We're going to try to be aggressive and get it out as soon as possible, but all of that remains to be seen.
Okay. Also, we had a question about where all the Outry plugin will live, because on the cloud provider side, I think Jago was about to talk with some folks from CNCF to see where we'll host controller managers that will be written by cloud providers.
Yeah.
So for volume plugin, will this volume go with the CCMs that will be written under some CNCF umbrella, or do you plan to move all the Out3 plugins into a new organization?
So we had a lot of discussion about this in the CSI group. And one thing that we really did not want to make the same mistake again was end up with a single repository owned by this group where a bunch of volume plugins are checked in. The problem with that approach is that this group, who doesn't have the expertise or the means to test these volume plugins, ends up having to maintain, test, revise these volume plugins. So instead, what we'd like to see is a model emerge where the storage vendors who are creating these volume plugins put them in their own repositories, and that way they can independently test, rev, maintain them. For cloud providers, what this would mean is that the cloud provider should host their own volume plugin in their own repository. If there are volume plugins that are being created by another third party, the third party should decide where to host the volume plugin. That's currently the plan of action, but where this gets fuzzy is volume plugins that don't have a clear owner or author, things like iSCSI, NFS, and
Yeah.
like. For those, we haven't settled on a solution yet. Brad Childs was proposing having a group of volume vendors have a repository that they agree on to maintain it independent of Kubernetes, and just put those drivers there. I'm okay with that proposal, but we can, have that discussion here and decide as we begin to approach GA.
Okay, so basically, CSI for cloud providers will go for on repositories owned by cloud providers. Then they will decide if it will land on CSI umbrella or not.
Yeah, and they'll own their own repositories. They could put the CSI drivers there, and folks can go get them from there.
Okay.
Yep. Perfectly said.
So Yassine, I had a discussion with Walter Fender, and he was entertaining an idea last time we talked about potentially pulling the existing controller manager code off into separate cloud provider controller managers, or cloud provider, like a separate cloud provider controller managers, essentially.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, that idea is still being considered?
Actually, the CCM is implemented. It's already landed. So we have, I think, DigitalOcean that implemented their own CCM. Same goes for Rancher and some other providers.
So in that approach, you wouldn't necessarily need, you wouldn't have a dependency on CSI, correct? Because the volume plugin would be built into the external cloud provider?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
The thing is that we need also to see if the adapters approach is fine for the SIG storage, and not do a complete rewrite of volume plugins.
Got it. Okay, sounds good. All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, so we'll move along to Aaron's topic. Aaron?
Thanks, Saad. So I just wanted to make sure, I've kind of been browsing around. I notice a lot of people are updating plugins for Block. And I wanted to make sure that we're coordinating that effort, and there isn't a lot of duplicate work going on. So I want to make sure that we can maybe capture that in like the planning spreadsheet, that if people are editing in Triggy plugins, especially to have them recognize the volume mode that they're capturing this in the 110 planning, so we're not duplicating work. So I guess I said that. That's all. And then in addition, as far as CSI goes, I'd like to propose we, if it's appropriate, begin that work to modify that to add also the changes for block at some point. So
yeah, that's part of one of the items that we have for beta.
Perfect. Okay, that's all I had.
Cool. So yeah, that is very good advice. If you are doing any work related to the storage SIG, please, please, please make sure it gets captured in our SIG planning doc. Otherwise, we're not going to be aware of it, and we can't coordinate and make sure release notes and all these things are in place. So please add it to the planning spreadsheet.
Is there a plan to add the raw block mode to the Flex Volume plugin?
So flex volume, that's a good question. My feeling right now is that we want to freeze the development of Flex API, maintain it as is. We want to continue to maintain it and keep it available so that any of the existing Flex volume drivers continue to work. But at the same time, I would like to stop expanding the API. We do have CSI now, and I'd like to have that effort invested into CSI rather than having two APIs that we continue to maintain and grow, which becomes very complicated and very messy to handle. So I'd say moving forward, let's freeze Flex and focus our efforts on CSI. So I'd like to see the block volume support added to CSI, but not to Flex.
I concur. I think that makes the most sense.
Okay. The reason I ask you because I actually work for Rook and we use the Flex Volume plugin due to CSI not being alpha stage and requiring the user to enable it via FeatureGate. So I heard like the timeline for CSI is gonna be for beta. I think the most aggressively will be second quarter, I believe that you said. So if that is if that's the case, then I think we should be okay waiting for that.
Mm-hmm.
But if not, if you say that it's gonna take longer than that, then we would like to get at least raw block mode Flex Volume in the meantime.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and we can continue to reassess as we go through this coming year. And if it turns out that we're not making the level of progress that we want on CSI, then we can consider introducing changes to Flex. The other thing to realize is that these features like block volume support are in themselves alpha. And part of being declared GA for the feature is going to be having the feature available in in something like CSI or Flex. Otherwise, I don't think it's fair to declare the feature GA.
Okay, you have a good point on that. Okay, thank you.
Question for me, like a newcomer. What do you suggest us to do? First look at the Flex or go with CSI right away?
That's a good question. So if you're writing a volume driver in the next couple quarters, you're in this gray area where we're in the process of deprecating the old thing, but the new thing is not quite ready yet, which is confusing and a terrible place to be. You have to look at what your deadlines are and what your willingness to for alpha features availability, how willing you are to have your things work with alpha. So if you're okay with alpha level functionality, I'd say start investing in CSI now. The volume plugin driver framework is already there, and then we're going to continue to revise it in this coming year. And so by the time it hits GA, you'll have a CSI driver that's been well tested and works. But if you need something immediately that's production ready, meaning within the next 1 or 2 quarters, and you're not willing to wait then I would suggest get a flex volume driver out there, and you can think about migrating in the future. It's possible that the flex volume driver will be sufficient for your needs. If all you need is attaching mounting, then flex volume is completely sufficient. And we're going to continue to maintain that. So it just depends on your need during this period.
I'll understand. I'll ask some questions later, but I got it.
Okay.
One question about deploying volume plugins for CSI volume plugins. Is CSI restricting the way we deploy plugin, or should it be a container that is deployed?
Yeah, so CSI tries to be very, very open and allow you to do packaging how you want. So ultimately, you do not need to have a container if you don't want to. All we need is a socket in the right place for us to communicate with.
Yeah.
We have recommendations for how you should deploy it. We provide sidecar containers that will make your life a lot easier if you have a containerized CSI volume plugin. You can use those, but you're free to do your own thing if you want to. I would suggest taking a look at the CSI design doc. It's all detailed in there.
That's what we started to do. Okay.
Saad, still in this Flex versus CSI story. What if we have a short deadline here and we can't use alpha features? And still, third requirements, we need our plugin to be containerized. What can we do? I know we have mount propagation already there, but it's still alpha, right? So is there a timeline for mount propagation to be beta or even GA?
I'll let Jan speak to the timeline for mount propagation. Go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, I would like to have mount propagation beta in 1.10 once we have more end-to-end tests in Kubernetes. And release after that, it should be GA.
Okay, so beta in 1.10, maybe GA in 1.11, something like that.
That's the plan. That's the plan.
All right.
Yeah, I realize that we are in this position in the SIG right now where we don't have good answers for how to extend Kubernetes with new volume plugins. Flex has its sharp edges, and CSI is not quite ready yet, and we don't want any more entry volume plugins. So it's not a good place to be, but we're going to have to suffer for a couple of quarters, and hopefully things will get better. We're going to try very hard to make that happen.
Yeah, and about this beta requirements list for CSI, where would we be able to get more details about that in the next meeting?
Yeah, well, there's a separate meeting that we hold for CSI implementation. We're going to create the list in here. I'll post the link to that doc in here.
Okay.
And then you can take a look at that, and then we'll report back during the planning session. So we'll have a planning session in this meeting on January 4th, and then the CSI team can report back in there. And at that point, if anybody is interested in helping out with the project, we can take on new volunteers as well.
Okay, I'll be there. Thank you.
Cool. All right, let's keep moving along. Next topic of discussion is by Harry Zhang. Harry?
I'm Harry.
Harry, sorry.
Yeah, so what I want to talk about is maybe we can think how to support the kata runtimes. I mean, the basically hypervisor-based container runtimes in CSI. I once talked with a few folks, including Jin Xu during KubeCon. So now kata runtime is kind of like a standard of hypervisor-based container runtime. So yeah, we actually did some work to make it use the persistent volume in Kubernetes. And if you check the doc I posted on the schedule, so But now we are using a flex volume, which is kind of like we will skip the attach phase and instead return some useful information back to the to Kubernetes, and then we will mount the block device directly to the hypervisor best pod. So this is basically how the Kata container runtimes work in Kubernetes with persistent volume. We do support the row block device, and we also support any kinds of byte mount volume, but because the Kata runtimes, it cannot use byte mount directly. It is actually kind of like a volume share or file system share, so the performance is not very good. So in production, we actually use the flex volume to mount a block device directly to the hypervisor best pod, and that also make it very hard for users like Cryo or Cry container to use Kata runtimes, because you have to maintain a built-in flex volume. That's how we do today. We actually have a built-in flex volume in CI regime to make it work. So we are very interested to see if it is possible in CSI to add some support in this kind of Kata runtime. And we actually did a prototype, which need to make a small change in CSI. It's actually adding detached flag into the CSI API. So if you are running Kata runtimes, it will not do the attach part. Instead, it will return a group of key value information back to the Kubernetes, and then the next step we will use that information to mount the block device directly to the pod. It's quite like what we are doing in flex volume now. Just we want to see if it is possible in CSI, so then we don't need to maintain a separate flex volume. Yeah, that's.
Would you be able to use the raw block feature to do this instead of?
Yeah, as I said, actually we support the pod level raw block device, but in this case, we're talking about the remote storage like safe Rvd, like Csi. I posted some user cases in the agenda. So in like NFS, so it's kind of not like the raw block device.
Okay, I think it would be good to understand the differences between
the differences is that
and then
there's no block device present on the host machine until we use our own method to make one. It's not present on the host machine. It's not like a disk. Yeah, for the best example is safe Rvd.
So Harry, I think we have the similar problem, and we have a hack around this one. So if we can just discuss it offline, that would be great. So essentially, we take the PV, but we use the PV connection info directly, and then when we start the VM, we just tell the QEMU this the endpoints you should use.
Yeah, it's basically the same case.
Yeah, I agree. But that is the general use case we can have for the virtualizations.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a question around that too. Actually, if we pass it directly to the VM, then it's like we can't pass any block device pass through. It has to be a driver which something like a VM understands today. If you look at keyboard, keyboard supports only Csi because but if you want to support something like a NVMe, then you cannot do a device pass through.
That's true. So there's limitations for each of these approaches.
Yeah, I have a dirty hack around it where my flex volume does a tempfs, and tempfs actually kind of, the tempfs I write the block device name and then directly pass through the block device. But these are all dirty hacks.
Yeah. Could we have a small discussion? Seems like we all have the same use case and we have different hacks. And if you can just come up with the generic solution, it's not just for us. I think it's eventually for the S3 kind of workload, it's going to be helpful as well. So just nowadays, we just pass the key as environmental variables into the pod and take the S3 credentials. I don't think that is sustainable.
Yeah. Actually, any kinds of hypervisor-based runtime will need this kind of feature, actually, including the work late, the could be working rate head, kata runtime. So they all need to use this kind of block device at volume directly to be mounted on the pod. But in order to do that, the CSI need to know some information about whether it should do the normal process or not. That's why actually the change we hope to make is to add a flag to CSI. I don't know if it's possible, or I would like to hear advices from you guys.
So extending the CSI spec is a conversation that we should take to the CSI community, which is independent of this SIG. I don't have enough context on this particular problem to say anything more about whether this is a good idea or not. But what I suggest, and it sounds like the suggestion is purely updating the CSI spec, correct?
Right. If the CSI spec is updated, then we can have our own CSI plugin that it will be work.
Okay. So let's take this proposal to the CSI community and propose it there, create an issue, and we can discuss it at the next CSI community meeting.
Yes, please.
And pick it up there.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like this is a general problem and it's worth finding a solution for.
Right. It's actually, it's really important for all the hypervisor-based runtime. So when is the next CSI meeting, may I ask?
So if you go to the container storage interface, GitHub, one of the repositories is community.
Okay.
And in there will be information about when the next meeting is and how you can join.
Yeah, sure.
It probably says email me. Yeah.
Could we add that to the top of the document? Just
people.
Yeah, I think I will also involve the Red Hat people and the Marintis people, so we can make it general enough to support all their Kubernetes together with other runtime. We can do that.
Okay, sounds good to me. Let's carry it on in the CSI community meeting, and we'll go from there. Any other questions, comments about this topic?
I'm good.
Okay. So we have 13 minutes left in this meeting. Does anybody want to discuss anything else?
I have a question about Rvd Provisioners.
Okay.
So what I wanted to ask was, we have the entry Rvd Provisioner, and I think external Rvd Provisioner has moved to cloud provider. Is that correct?
I don't have the latest on that. Wamin, do you know?
Cloud provider. No, we are not moving to that direction. There's an external Rvd Provisioner for the sake of people who cannot hack, because Rvd Provisioner use Rvd command, and not every Kubernetes containers package that's command. So for the sake of for people who don't have Rvd command in the controller master, we provide the external provisioner, but it's not going to the cloud provider.
So what's the plan? Like, so is the entry one going to be deprecated because of
they're lockstep synced? So
okay.
In the entry is also in external provisioner.
I see. And like is this going to be also moving to the CSI model, or is this going to remain like that?
Eventually, we are in the CSI model as well.
Okay. And so, like, are there timelines? Like, we are currently starting to use that in production. So
the thing to note about the entry volume plugins is that they have an API. They're part of the Kubernetes API. Like every single volume plugin adds to the Kubernetes API, and anything that's in the Kubernetes API has a deprecation policy. The deprecation policy is that you can't deprecate anything inside the API until like Kubernetes 2.0, or I believe a notice of 1+ years. So for all intents and purposes, it's not going to suddenly disappear or become deprecated.
Okay.
We do plan to migrate these entry volume plugins to CSI, but that would happen implicitly and invisibly by actually keeping the API as is so that the existing workloads don't notice it. But instead of having the business logic handled entry inside the Kubernetes binary, have the Kubernetes binary deploy a CSI volume plugin and proxy to that CSI volume plugin. And that way, as far as the end user is concerned, nothing has changed, but the internal logic that is fulfilling that request, instead of it being the entry volume plugin, will be CSI. So what that means is that you can continue to rely on the entry volume plugins as is, and if there is ever a transition or migration to CSI, it should be implicit to your, or it should not be noticed by your workloads.
Got it. Okay. And so at least I have looked at the Rvd Provisioner. Like I think it's difficult to unit test these kind of things which depend on external binaries. Is there does that change in the CSI? I know like CSI has an interface, so you could write mocks and all, but how do you, like, is there a plan for Rvd kind of provisioners to promote more unit testing and all?
Yeah, actually, Luis is a really good person to talk to about this because he's helping with the CSI testing effort. Luis, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I completely agree that testing is extremely important. So what we are doing as part of the CSI team is to create different models of testing. First, we have already provided a mock driver for the COs or the clients to be able to test. Second, we are working on a kind of a sanity test for drivers to use to test their driver to make sure it satisfies the CSI spec. So that's two things. The third thing is that there's actually an E2E test part of Kubernetes that once a driver is complete, they can add their own section to it, and they can run through the same pattern to make sure that it actually works with Kubernetes. So there will be 3 models of testing for CSI drivers.
Sounds good, but I think this is only going to apply to the CSI drivers, right? So until, for example, Rvd moves to CSI, I think nothing will happen, right? I think.
It is, again, yeah, this is all CSI specific. So once they start moving to CSI model, then they can then plug into this automatically.
Got it. So is this understanding correct? So let's say the CSI is implemented, and I'm not very familiar with the CSI. So let's say CSI is implemented by Rvd and let's say Gluster, right? So both of them will go and implement a mock driver that closely models their behavior and then use that for unit testing?
No. There is already a mock driver for clients.
Okay.
That mock driver. So okay, let me get started. There's 2 ways on this mock driver thing. I don't want to confuse them. There is a mock driver from EMC code, which you can use that can be containerized and deployed, and it actually answers to all the calls.
I see.
That's from EMC code. There's another mock driver from our community where it's meant for unit tests, not for deployment. Okay. Where you as a client can then unit test your calls to a CSI driver by mocking them and then purposely failing them and such. Okay. So there's 2 type of models here. So again, those are specific to CSI, and those are specific again to client testing. But you're talking about driver testing. In driver testing, you need a kind of a client to execute the API calls to CSI, and those we're working on right now actually to be able to do that.
So
and we actually go ahead.
Yeah, could you post the links in the doc, and also
I will add that to the doc right now. Actually, that's a good point.
Yeah, I might be interested too.
Okay.
And yeah, so yeah, sorry. So and is someone working on the CSI for Rvd?
Not at the moment that I'm aware of. I think that's going to be happening over the next couple of quarters as we begin the transition over.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
In the meantime, if there's anything in the in-tree volume plugins that's not working for you, please feel free to continue to revise and fix bugs. While we're not adding new in-tree volume plugins, you should not have to live with bugs in your existing in-tree volume plugins.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, any other questions, comments, concerns, any topics of discussions? We have 6 minutes left. All right, then we'll call it for today, and our next meeting is going to be the first week of January on Thursday. We'll see you then.
Take care, guys.
Take care.
Thank you.
Take care. See you.
Happy holidays. Bye.